Hello and welcome back to Bigfoot Lake. Tonight we have another amazing Bigfoot encounter to share with you. This one is from California, San Diego County actually. And this was from 1979-1980, in that time period. So with that being said, pull up a stump, sit back, relax, and let's dive into tonight's Bigfoot encounter. In the mid-70s, my mother bought a 17 3/4 acre ranch in a rural part of San Diego County. 4 semi-abandoned buildings were on it, an old barn down in the valley, and up on the hill a pool house with 2 small locker rooms, a 3-bedroom guest house with a big 2-level basement, and as the main building, a giant old 12-room thing known as the ranch house. This hulking structure was begun in 1905 as a farmhouse with a huge barn attached. It was centered around a 2-story rock chimney with 3 big fireplaces, 1 upstairs, 2 down. One side for barn uses, the other was designed for heating the house and cooking. The subsequent string of owners made a few modest additions, and then later, in the early 50s, it was bought by a wealthy doctor who extensively remodeled the place, and it was turned into a private school. Many elaborate additions were made, and the barn now became a big auditorium with an indoor balcony and large windows on 2 sides. Then, up on the hill, the doctor built an indoor pool house and had 2 wheelchair ramps added to the guest house. After the doctor was gone, it all fell into heavy disrepair. The roof came off of the pool house, and the giant sliding glass door disappeared from the big room of the ranch house. It was vacant for some time. Occasionally we would find evidence that transients or even sheep and horses had been through there. It was all up on a hill overlooking thousands of acres of marshland that ran all the way around to the west to a saltwater lagoon. The large drainage area had a creek that ran along one side of it with lots of trees and cattails and dense brush. When there was lots of rain, the entire bottomland was flooded. In drier years, the creek had several channels with ponds scattered in and around it. In the old days, that place harbored everything from crawdads to turtles and frogs, up to raccoons and coyotes, bobcats, and even an occasional deer or mountain lion. To this day, the amount of bird life in there is considerable. Where fresh water meets salt, it is often called an ecozone. Once in a while, I would go out and spend the night in the old place by myself, or with a cousin, or a friend or 2. We would bring a stick of butter and sleeping bags and live off the land by collecting a pile of crawdads to cook up from the swamp, then picking lemons and oranges from one of the old orchards. Later, someone came up with the idea of having parties out there, which we did, but the aftermath caused my mother to hire a live-in caretaker, a guy who, although a few years older than me, ended up being one of my close friends. Burke, the caretaker, and I used to go down at night with our flashlights and BB or pellet guns to shine bullfrogs. We would sneak up to a pond, and while one man shined the light, the other would pot frogs. We had a long painter's pole with a treble hook on one end to haul out the frogs. We worked out a looping trail which used the narrow openings through the heavy brush, and it went from pond to frog-infested pond. We had done this a few times now, and were really pleased with the system. This night, I had a green fisherman's creel over my shoulder for the frogs, and Burke was awkwardly carrying an old white bucket. the handle, and the crook of his left arm. I pumped up and loaded my air rifle, and we happily headed down the hill towards the swamp. We hit the trees and followed the narrow, twisting trail that led through the few openings in the tangled undergrowth. We sneaked up to the first pond on our loop and were shining the light and whispering about the frogs. Suddenly, the crunching of leaves and snapping of branches behind us made us think that someone was coming. He was violently crashing his way up to us, maybe drunk, judging by the way he breathed and thrashed around. We weren't sure what we were doing in the swamp was exactly legal, so we turned off our flashlights, and Burke quickly grabbed Stuart, his wonderful dog, who was growling now like I'd never heard any dog growl. Burke held him tighter and grabbed his mouth and shushed him. When all the noise we had been making silenced, we could hear that whatever it was getting closer. I thought to myself, my God, why is he coming right through the thick stuff instead of going around? I noticed too, alarmingly, that this intruder was not using any flashlight. There was no moonlight either, only a glow from the distant town. It was creepy hearing something huge thrash around toward you in the dark. It came to a halt about 50 feet away, where it made a few sniffs like it was searching, and then a slight whine with an anxious note. My blood ran cold. A human shouldn't do this, I was thinking. Besides, it seemed too big to be a human or any other animal around. Its breathing sounded large, almost like a horse. Suddenly, it made a growl with an angry pitch to it, like a dog that's found something he doesn't like and is about to attack. The branches started really breaking then, getting very close. Burke quickly dropped his bucket and cocked his BB gun, and then re-grabbed and muzzled Stuart with his free left arm. In the process, however, the dog made a frightened little whine. Whatever it was, it abruptly stopped again right near us, 10, 15 feet at the most, like it had caught the dog's whine. Then we heard heavy, heavy breathing, and it was going up in tempo. It sounded huge and angry, or maybe distraught, like a big man in the middle of a terrible fight. The only thing we knew was that something very big and very angry was coming at us, pulling its way right through impossibly thick brush in the dark towards where we stood in shocked silence. Burke let go of his wildly wriggling dog's muzzle to turn on his flashlight, and the dog went insane. Then Burke cussed and backed quickly out of the way because walking up from behind us on two legs, there now came the angry thing itself, an enormous, hair-covered creature with its eyes reflecting in the flashlight's beam. As Burke ran to my left, I turned on my light too and saw that it was headed for me. Terrified, frozen, and completely forgetting the loaded .22 caliber pellet gun, which I had just switched to my left hand, I extended my right arm towards it and shined my light directly into its face. It stopped and leaned down at me with a menacing look until it was actually leaning over the hand holding the light. For a second or two, it just stared and viciously glowered at me, panting and seething hatred. I was frozen. I watched its eyes flicker and shine like an animal's. Then it took a deep breath. and let out a thunderous scream right in my face. It was so loud, it was humanly impossible. I could actually feel the blast of wind from its lungs. My ears overloaded and throbbed, and then just shut down. In a way, so did my teenage brain. My mind was flooded with a calming, "It's okay, this is all just a joke" kind of feeling. While my ears were ringing, even I thought I heard music. I guess that was shock. The creature's scream was blood-curdling and high, like a terrified woman, but low and extremely powerful at the same time. The mouth was wide open and way bigger than a human mouth. Its jaw open like a hinge, and I saw it had big, wide-looking teeth. My mind was in slow-motion trance or something. I remember that I backed away with my ears still throbbing. It turned to leave, and somewhere in all that time, I involuntarily shot the pellet gun at it while the rifle was straight up, hitting it along its right ear. It walked away angrily in front of both flashlights for a few steps, still emitting short screams. It was covered with dark red hair everywhere except its face, feet, and hands, which were light white and large. It began plowing through the water, trees, and brush, and it totally ignored the lunging dog, who was barking in such a high pitch. Anyone could have seen it was too terrified to do anything anyway. It was headed west, towards the confluence of the freshwater creek and the lagoon, a mile or so away. We searched with the lights, as the thumping of feet, the snapping of large branches, and the yelping dog faded away, until, after a few hundred yards, the barking of the dog was the only thing still audible. "Whoa," we both said, seconds later, when we were sure it was gone. "Are you okay?" Burke asked, as he walked back over. "Yeah, what the hell was that?" I said. That? I don't know. I guess it was Bigfoot," Burke said. I stared at the swamp around me, looking at the mist rising off the ground like the set of a horror movie, listening to the dog still sounding off in the distance. It seemed possible for a second. Could this be Bigfoot? Then I said, "Yeah, right. If that was Jay, he got shot with the BB gun, but it's his own damn fault. Jay was our mutual friend who was very tall." Burke said, "You think it was Jay? No way. Come on, man, be real. That thing was huge." I was still dazed, but I stopped and thought about it. Suddenly, the whole prank explanation I was hanging on to became absurd for a number of reasons, starting with how terrified Burke looked, the size of this thing, the hair, and so much else. It was all too impossible to fake. I guess it was. I remembered how my ears rang and how I actually felt the blast of the scream, like I was in front of a giant horn or something. I also thought about the realness of its face and eyes, and how incredibly thick and muscular the thing was. We eventually called back the dog and went on hunting for a little while. Nothing else happened that night, but we discussed it thoroughly and brought up facts like, for one thing, nobody could scream that way or that loud. Nobody. Ever. Period. For another, we were on a path, and it came and then left through an area so thick with undergrowth that I personally have gotten stuck and even airborne in it before, and that was during daylight hours. Also, it charged right through that stuff, breaking large branches, apparently without any pain. And finally, when it took off, it was headed deeper into the swamp, in the pitch dark, at 1 in the morning. The funny thing is, I never fully accepted it as being a Bigfoot. Not in San Diego County. We mentioned it and even went on to joke about it, saying it was each other's angry ex or current girlfriend, and then we dropped it without too much thought. Though we didn't go so far into the swamp anymore as we normally did, and we cut our hunts a little bit shorter, especially after one of us mentioned it might be sneaking back to watch us. We told a few friends the story and were shouted down in derision. I finally explained it as being a wild man, although obviously it couldn't have been one, there being no such thing. But it was easier to say and to live with, and after a while it became almost a forgotten memory. So that concludes a fantastic encounter from the late 1970s, early 1980s in San Diego County, California. So what do you think about tonight's story? Two men making their way through this heavily brushed area, swampy area, from pond to pond, collecting bullfrogs, and this creature appearing out of the darkness. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story, and perhaps you know other stories from this San Diego County area, or perhaps you're from that area. If you have any other encounters you'd like to share, would love to hear from you. And let me know in the comments, what do you think of this story? What do you think of this amazing encounter? I personally found this one quite terrifying. But on the other hand, with this creature being so close and totally in control of that situation, it still turned around and walked away. So I think that says a lot in itself. So yeah, leave a comment. Let me know what you think. Appreciate each and every one of you for joining us here tonight at Bigfoot Lake for tonight's story. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you have a great night, and we will see you on the next.